Hello, and welcome to your second field service. This is Chaplain Stephen Roberts, and today we're going to continue through our series through the book of Esther, exploring the hidden hand of God. And today, our theme will be power and pleasure. Now, I'm not sure if you guys remember from Spider-Man, but Uncle Ben, while he was dying, told his son Peter, or his nephew Peter Parker, with great power comes great responsibility. But it's actually not like that for most part in real life. It should be that way. That's the ideal. But realistically, for many people, with great power comes great pleasure. The two go hand in hand. Both are hungry beasts that always want to be fed. With great power often comes great pleasure, neither of which are ultimately fulfilling. And we'll talk about that a little bit today. So I'm going to read Esther, chapter 1. Verses 1 through 9. I'll give you some running commentary as we think about the pursuit of power and pleasure. Esther chapter 1, starting with verse 1. Now in the days of King Xerxes, the Xerxes who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days when King Xerxes sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. I want you guys to just notice a few things with these first 4 verses. First of all, recognize the detail here. Last time we talked about how the Bible is real history. It's not simple mythology trying to explain real historical events. No, it actually is giving you history and then interpreting that history for us. Notice all the detail here about King Xerxes, a real figure. The King Xerxes, mentioned 3 times. The extent of his empire in world history, from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. Susa, his citadel, the 3rd year of his reign. This is giving you everything you need in terms of the figure, the space, the timing. This is real history. But notice also the obsession here with Xerxes. Our story here starts off where most people would think it should start off, with the most powerful man, with the most powerful kingdom. King Xerxes mentioned 3 times here. To let you know, at least initially, this is probably just going to be another story about the person we all think the story should be about. The one who has all the power, all the prestige. And notice how he wields that power and prestige. How he shows it off before everybody. Verse 4 here. All of these leaders were before him, gathered before him in Susa, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. For 6 months, this man was parading his power. And what lavish terms here, the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness. It's like this is a man who thinks he's God. Oh wait, this is a man who thinks he's God. And a lot of people do as well. And here they are engaged in this heavenly celebration to this man's earthly power and prestige. In a sense, this is a human copy of what we would expect from God if he were to have a heavenly kingdom. And yet something about this seems hollow. And we'll explore that more in a minute. But let's continue on with the passage. Verse 5. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods, and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Whew. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict: there is no compulsion, For the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Xerxes. With great power comes great pleasure. And we move from the 6-month celebration of this man's greatness, this man that people believed to be God, to the great party he lavished for 7 days for people great and small in the capital of Susa. We're given these rich descriptions. It literally takes your breath away trying to read them all out. And then we're told drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. For 7 days, this king in all of his power and pomp is granting power and pleasure to all these other dignitaries and leaders throughout all these provinces that King Xerxes had conquered. And it was all under this rule. There is no compulsion. Actually, in this context, what that means is there is no restraint here, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. In other words, gentlemen, bask in my power, and you can have all the pleasure you want. You see, power only goes so far, and when you bring all the powerful men of the world together, what else can you get except more and more pleasure, or at least something that feels like pleasure? But again, something that's going to ring incredibly hollow, because already in this final verse here, this first section, there seems to be a bit of intrigue. Verse 9, Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Xerxes. Queen Vashti? Who's she? Isn't the story about Xerxes? How are we finishing a section here with the name of the queen? And she's given a feast in the palace that belonged to King Xerxes? She's not necessarily doing anything wrong here yet. But the fact that she seems to take some of the spotlight here away from King Xerxes while in King Xerxes' palace introduces a bit of tension that makes you wonder how total, how absolute his power really is. How satisfying his pleasure really is. Is it all there truly at his fingertips? Can you get all the pleasure you want if you have all the power in the world? And this is going to raise a question or two for us. I think you see here that there is something hollow about the quest of man to be God. Look at this pursuit of power. Look at this pursuit of pleasure. We often envy people like this who have all this power and pleasure. Yet is it really all that it seems? It reminds me of one of the great American millionaires, John Rockefeller, who was once asked, "Hey John, how much money is enough?" And he said, "More." If power or pleasure are your God, you will go chasing after them for the rest of your life and never really get them. You will be on a hamster wheel that will always tempt you and yet never satisfy you. And that's even more pitiful than it is to envy someone like that and all their power and all their pleasure and wish we had it, not realizing how absolutely hollow it truly is. How important is that for us to realize in these days when we're racked by this virus that has shaken the world, that has collapsed part of our economy, as we find civil strife and injustices all about us? Do we really want to jump on the hamster wheel of power and pleasure? Do we want to engage in this quest, this ascent of man to become God, when already we see there's chinks in the armor, there's cracks in the wall? Already we see that it's hollow. In fact, this story of man ascending to be God, whether we look at it throughout history or just consider examples of it like this, is almost sickening. There's something about it that turns our stomach. Why would we make that our story? And I assure you, in various ways, all of us do try to make this our story. And this makes you think, doesn't it? What if the roles and the direction here were reversed? What if the storyline for us, and perhaps for this book, is not fundamentally about man pursuing his own deity, his own power, his own pleasure? What if the greater storyline is what if instead God descended to man? What if the true king traded his crown of glory for a crown of thorns? What would that party look like? Would we eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die? Or would we be able to eat and drink to the glory of God, find true joy and satisfaction for our hearts? Next week, we talk about Queen Vashti. We talk about that chink in the armor, the crack in the wall, the thing that will ultimately prove to be the beginning of the downfall of King Xerxes, and perhaps the rise of marginalized, subjugated people by the grace of God. Please join me next week for your next field service.